Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Diana Rusu, and on behalf of UN Women Empower Women, I would like to welcome to Women Leaders Changing the Workplace webinar. Thank you very much for joining. Investing in young women leadership is key to implementing the SDG agenda, or a so-called Sustainable Development Goal agenda. Investing in young women's leadership and economic empowerment of young women is essential to prepare them for 21st century skills job market. At Empower Women, we believe that leadership is one of the important skills. Therefore, we're paying attention to develop young women, boys, men's leadership skills, as well as women economic empowerment skills and economic empowerment in general. Empower Women is working to systemize the learning opportunities, and soon we will have more details around this topic. We're happy to have today with us Kristen Pressner, the Global Head of Human Resources for Roche Diagnostics, inspirational female leader and advocate of women in leadership. Our agenda is very simple. After a round of welcoming, we will have Kristen presentation, and then we will be happy to take your questions, any comments, and to engage in a very, casual conversation. If any time during the webinar you will have a question or a comment, please feel free to type it on the questions panel, or at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session, just raise your hand and you will have an opportunity to interact as well with us using the audio connection. I would like to emphasize that this webinar is organized in partnership with two wonderful champions, 2015-2016 Global Champions for Women Economic Empowerment, Stancu and Ilinca Vasiliu, two active and dedicated young women who recognize the importance of being economically empowered and would like to share from their experience activating change in their communities. Among different other activities, as organizing a presentation about the importance of women economic empowerment in their community, participating to the Secretaries General high-level panel for women economic empowerment consultation. They were very active on empowerment.org, engaging in e-discussions and contributing to various campaigns, and here they are proposing this webinar and collaborating with our team to organize it. Just to mention that Empowerment Champions for Women Economic Empowerment represent Empower Women's eyes and ears and extended arms to ensure that change for women economic empowerment is reaching communities around the world above and beyond empowerwomen.org. The Champions for Change program enables ordinary, extraordinary women, and thank you, Sasha Bayer, for bringing this concept to us, also one of our champions. This program brings men and women alike to identify local challenges in their communities, receive capacity building and coaching, and then work with Empower Women and peers to conceptualize solutions to these challenges. If you want to become one, follow our announcements and sign up to receive our newsletter. This fall, you will have a chance to submit your application, compete, and become a driver of change. I would like now to stop for a little bit before passing to Monica and Ilinca and just take two poll questions, so it will be easier for us to know how to direct this presentation and what are you interested mostly in. So please respond to the first question. The first question is, why did you want to participate in this webinar? Interest in the topic itself, the organizers, the guest speaker, social media promotion, or any other? We will wait for 1 minute and we'll be happy to receive your sincere answers. Thank you so much for providing your answer. As I can see, and I'm sharing the response with you, 51% responded that they are very interested in the topic itself, and we assume so, as this is one of the most important, topics that people search on empowerment.org and request webinars and e-discussions. And Kristen, 47% responded that they are willing to speak and to engage, and they attended the webinar because of a guest speaker. So we're all looking forward for your presentation. And I guess our social media promotion was also very good, since 2% of you also decided to attend because you saw the announcement via our social media channels. The second question, we would like to know level in your current organization. This will help us to go over more examples during the webinar. So I am launching, and we will wait for 1 minute for your responses. Thank you very much for your responses. As you can see as well, 35% are individual contributors, 37 managers, and 60% executives. I assume they would like to know more how to be even a better executive and manager, and to become even stronger and, in their leadership skills. 8% leading leaders, and 5% are inspiring leader students that maybe at the moment don't work, but they can't wait to engage in employment activity. Thank you so much for your answers. And now, without any further ado, I would like to pass it on to Monica and Ilinca to share a bit more about their interest to leadership and women economic empowerment.
My name is Ilinca. Before we give over to Kristen, we would like to say a few words as to why we are interested in the topic of leadership. For me personally, I became passionate about leadership after discovering that many women that I came in contact with were reluctant to actually become leaders. And when I would ask them what's holding you back, many of them respond by saying, I don't want to take on the extra responsibility. What I found striking was the fact that many of these women were already carrying out tasks required of leaders in their positions, but without the financial benefits. I believe that it's essential in order to increase the number of women leaders in any industry or organization, you have to change women's perception of leadership first. And I think Kristen in particular is the perfect example of a successful woman leader who can positively impact women's perspective of leadership and perhaps lead to more women being in leadership roles.
Well, I wanted to develop this special webinar because I'm passionate about linking business success with social progress. I believe that feminist theories and human rights concepts should not only be discussed in academic circles or at the UN, but they should be part of the DNA of every organization. Because when women succeed, the entire community succeeds. I'm convinced that women's economic empowerment is essential to gender equality and that every institution should have more diverse leaders. We cannot achieve gender equality without giving women more financial freedom. The topic of women leadership in the workplace is so important. Therefore, it is our pleasure today to introduce you to Kristen Pressner, an accomplished HR executive. She will talk to us about why there are so few women in leadership positions and the possible benefits and solutions for getting more women in leadership positions. Kristen is Global Head of Human Resources for Roche Diagnostics and is based in Basel, Switzerland. She supports nearly 35,000 employees across 150 countries worldwide. With nearly 90,000 employees globally, Roche is the world's largest biotech company and the world leader in vitro diagnostics. Kristen is passionate about bringing out the best in people and is in the unique position to provide pragmatic and honest insights as someone who is passionate about diversity as a business driver, who can provide perspectives from behind the curtain of HR and with an eye towards the broader global environment, and finally, as someone who knows the subject of women in leadership from the perspective of a real woman executive herself and as a mother of 4 children. Kristen's keynote addresses and podcasts are truly inspirational and have triggered Kristen's recognition as an important voice on the topic of women in leadership. We are so excited to have her calling all the way from Switzerland to talk to us about her career and how women leaders are changing the workplace. Before handing it over to Kristen, we would like to encourage you to follow us on Twitter. Kristen is at K Pressner, and Empower Woman is at empower_women. Welcome, Kristen, and with that, over to you, Kristen.
Thank you very much, Diana, Monica, and Ilinca, for this opportunity. It is a big passion of mine to see women step into leadership roles and to really encourage women to see themselves as the leaders that they can become. And I found the initial poll questions particularly insightful, and so I would like it if we could ask a couple more, just to get a sense of the view of the folks who have dialed in. And so if we could do the next poll question, Diana, I'd be interested to hear what the listeners out there believe is the percentage of female CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. Diana, will you stop it when it's time to stop it?
Yes. We will have 2 seconds, 1 minute, and poll is over, and I'm sharing the responses. 61% believe this is 4%, and 33% of our participants believe this is 15, and only 6 believe this is 25.
Great, thank you for that. The second question that I would like to ask participants, and I'll come back and address both of these in a second, is, so actually, let me close on that one. 61% of you were right. The number of female CEOs in Fortune 500 companies is currently at 4%. You did much better than a recent survey that I saw where a group of people were asked what percentage they thought that was, and the most common answer was 23%. It led an article that I read to remark that female CEOs are kind of like shark attacks, extremely rare but so well covered in the media that you think they're pretty common. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that female CEOs at that top level are still extremely rare at 4%. So if that's the case, then what's the issue? And so the next question we wanted to ask is, what do you think is holding women back from these top jobs? So we gave a selection of answers that we've commonly heard, and we'd like to hear your view.
As we have a question, we will leave our participants to respond in 1 minute. I'm very curious to find out. 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much. 33% believe that women are held to higher standards. 25% believe that family responsibility do not allow them to pursue a more important role in and develop leadership skills. 25 also believe women don't have sufficient connections to do so, and only 17% believe that cultural restriction and biases are an important factor.
Thank you for that, Diana, and thank you all for your inputs. It's helpful to understand where your heads are, and I also, like Diana, was curious to see what you would say. And I'm pleased to see that no one selected option 3, which was that women don't make good managers, because I couldn't find anything to be further from the truth. But I also didn't think that anyone who would join this webinar would probably pick that. I do think that the content that I've prepared for the next few minutes will probably hit on some of the other elements that were mentioned in that poll. And luckily, we've set aside a good chunk of time also to just do a loose Q&A, and so should you have a particular element that isn't addressed, then you'll have the opportunity to come back and ask it during the question period. So the first thing I wanted to do was share a little bit of context with you. And so thank you, Diana. And what I want to share is that the world is changing. And because the world is changing, so is leadership. And I think this is really important for us as women leaders to understand. In my view, there's never been a better time to step into leadership because of the shifts that are happening in the world. And so you'll see I put on here, the world is very VUCA. And VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think a lot of people think that the world is VUCA in certain parts of the world, maybe in parts of the world that are emerging economies, or are parts of the world that are torn by war or have been struck by natural disaster. But the reality is the world is VUCA even in seemingly stable and less VUCA markets. Just as a couple of examples that come to my mind, when you look at the UK, recently we had Brexit, and I think that showed how VUCA the world could be in a market that was seen as very stable. Here in my own country of Switzerland, very much a Western European stable seeming economy. Not that long ago, the Swiss franc currency was unpegged from the euro, and it created a lot of instability in global monetary markets. And so it gives you a sense that really the world is VUCA for all of us, volatile, uncertain, changing, and ambiguous. In addition, there are global shifts that are at play that are going to impact how we do business and how we lead. And those include a number of things, not the least of which is the economy becomes much more global. When you just think of the people from around the world that we have on this call, it hits you. Our world also becomes much more digitalized. The fact that we can have this call gives you a sense of that. And also we're seeing a shift in values as our working economy moves generationally, and the baby boomer generation starts to consider retirement and is replaced in smaller numbers, creating a talent gap by the millennial population. And so there's a number of factors that are at play in order that are changing the global economy as well. And so what does that mean for us as leaders? In the end, it means that leadership is moving from more of a historical command and control, planning and problem solving type of endeavor into one that requires leaders to actively engage in uncertainty. And so leadership now and in the future is becoming much more about collaboration and agility. And I believe that that's going to play nicely to the strengths that women typically bring to the table. So I wanted to share some things with you today. First, I want to start with a Chinese proverb. And that proverb is, the best time to plant a tree. And the answer is 20 years ago. But the second best time to plant a tree is now. And like that Chinese proverb, we can complain about the lack of progress. We can say, wow, only 4% of women CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. Or we can decide that today is our second best time. And each of us can take steps to help balance the scales and ensure that we do see more women in leadership positions. But why would we want to? So I want to be clear that the research shows that when we have better gender balance at the top, we have better organizational cultures, and we get better business results. So today I want to share 3 very pragmatic things that I believe will help us get better balance at the top. And when you look at it, most organizations have a good gender balance in entry-level positions, but almost without exception, almost anywhere in the world that you look, the higher you get, the gender balance is lacking at the top. And as an HR professional and a woman leader myself, and a work in progress myself, I've found that there are 3 things that I see women doing differently than men. And so I wanted to bring those today into the discussion. And it's 3 things. 1, know yourself. 2, know you can do it. And 3, know the rules of engagement. So I'm going to walk through each of the 3 of those very briefly, and then if we want to expand more afterwards in the Q&A, we can. But on know yourself, I notice that a lot of women get caught up in the day-to-day, and not as many take a step back and really ask themselves, what am I capable of? What am I here on this earth to accomplish? I mean, really, truly stopping and asking yourself that. Because here's what I believe. I believe each of us is here for a reason. And I believe that if you don't live into yours, you are withholding something from the world that it's owed. So you really need to take a step back and take the time to invest and get to know yourself. Be clear on what you can and what you can't do. Figure out what you're going to go after. Start with knowing yourself. The second one is know you can do it. So maybe you've heard about the confidence gap. This is this premise that women somehow lack confidence, and this is the issue. The implication is that women have low, or at least lower, confidence all the time relative to men. And I personally have not found this to be true. What I have found to be true is that oftentimes women, more so than men, hesitate to accept that stretch role, to apply for that big job where she doesn't meet all the hiring criteria. And the research shows that women actually systematically underestimate our abilities. One thing I can tell you as someone who plays a big role in deciding who gets the big promotion is that nobody gets the promotion if they don't believe in themselves. The natural result of low confidence is inaction. So when we women hesitate because we're not sure, we contribute to holding ourselves back by not acting. However, one of the best ways to gain confidence is to do something scary and be successful. So my encouragement is you just have to believe and know that you can do it. And then finally, the rules of engagement. How do things really work? And I've got bad news here. The rules are not always fair. There are differences in how men and women leaders are perceived for doing the same thing. It's not fair, but we need to be aware of it. In Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, she shares that the data shows that success and likability are positively correlated for men, yet negatively correlated for women. This is all too familiar to the many women out there who are applauded for their results at work, but then penalized for being too aggressive or out for herself or difficult or abrasive. In fact, there's a famous Pantene TV ad where they show men and women doing the same thing, but put the labels on them. So a man is, dictating a memo and he's seen as a boss, but the woman is seen as bossy. A man is giving a very persuasive speech and he's seen as persuasive, and the woman doing the same thing is seen as pushy. A man is working late with a baby sleeping nearby and he's dedicated. A woman is doing the same thing and she's labeled as selfish. So it just gives you a sense of the fact that there can be different standards that are applied. I believe at the core of this is something called unconscious bias. And so I'd like to quickly explain unconscious bias because it has a big impact on us. Our brain has to handle a lot of information coming in. So in order to process it, our brain takes the liberty of looking for patterns in that information and then filtering for us what our brain sees as the most important bits. In summary, our brains take shortcuts. Shortcuts can be very, very good. Without shortcuts, we'd have to process way too much information. I mean, imagine if every single time you wanted to shake hands or sing happy birthday, you had to really think it through. But brain shortcuts can have a downside. And it's because they see patterns that are based on the cumulative effect of what we've been exposed to throughout our lives. And the whole thing takes place in the background of our brains, which means we're not even aware it's happening. The research says that we unconsciously expect men to be assertive and strong and driven. And we unconsciously expect women to be helpful and sensitive and supportive. If we put that even more simply, we see men as taking charge and women as taking care. And no, it's not because everyone's a misogynist. But men taking charge and women taking care is what we've mostly been exposed to. And our brain shortcuts will do the rest, unconsciously redirecting us into those same patterns that it recognizes. And once I realized this, it became clear to me why getting gender balance in top leadership is so hard. Men are expected to be assertive and confident, so we welcome their leadership. But women are expected to be nurturing and collaborative. So when women lead, it can go against expectations. And women often face unconscious pushback from men and other women, and even themselves. So sure, there might be cases of bad behavior, but even if you remove that from the equation, you couldn't solve the problem because bias is coming at women from many directions, including from inside our own heads. But I believe that if we take these pragmatic steps to know ourselves, know we can do it, and know the rules of engagement, we'll be able to engage and lead and support ourselves, and hopefully at some point, others as well. My ask would be that together we plant that tree today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I have so many questions now. I can go on, and you know, it's interesting what you mentioned. So many things that we found out to be true and relevant to our community, to UN Women community and Empower Women community, because unconscious, you spoke about rules are not fair, unconscious bias, and so many aspects, and a lot of the times during our engagement with the community, these are among the first things mentioned, and I would be, you know, it will be not unfair for me to ask the first questions, and I know Ilinca and Monica already received several, and we will start with those, but just to mention that this is something that our community recognizes and basically asked to develop more how we can overcome this bias and how we can receive that step of liberty or maybe conscious cognitive decision where this will not affect us so much, even it's over there and it's constructed by the society. So I already can see that we have several hands raised. This means that our participants would like to have an interaction. We will start first with some questions already received during the presentation. Ilinca and Monica will pose them, and maybe later on we can take the audio questions as well.
Okay, so first of all, Kristen, thank you so much. That was very, very interesting, and I'm sure our participants can't wait to interact with you. So I'll keep it short and sweet. The first question is, what are the advantages, in your opinion, of being an underdog or an outsider in top leadership?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Ilinca. I think that it may be a good idea not to view yourself as an underdog or an outsider to start with. I actually see that perhaps having fewer women in top leadership provides a competitive advantage versus a disadvantage. And so that competitive advantage to me comes in the form of a diversity of opinion and a diversity of perspective. And I mean, when you quite simply look at the world, like I work in healthcare, you know, half the world is women. Women disproportionately contribute to healthcare decisions. So why wouldn't it be a competitive advantage to have a diversity of opinion at the table? And this is exactly what drives those better business results that I referred to earlier. By having a diverse set of opinions, by having your leadership represent your client group or the world at large, you have a much better chance of coming to the best possible solutions, the most innovative solutions. And so I see it as a competitive advantage because these are needed opinions in order to get to the right solutions.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Kristen, I recently read an article on what is stopping women from becoming leaders. It was the idea that if you ask women leaders who or what is your worst enemy, you might find a lot of the answers to be myself. What is your opinion on that? Is this just a matter of confidence?
Thanks for the question. That sounds familiar. I think I might have answered myself also. And of course I shared some earlier comments with regards to confidence, but I do think that confidence is also interwoven quite incredibly with those unconscious messages that we send ourselves about whether or not women belong in leadership. But I'm reminded of a story that I like to tell because I think a lot of women think that they can't do something because they can't envision doing it perfectly, kind of holding ourselves to perhaps a super high or impossible standard. And there's an old story that I've heard of two men who are camping, and suddenly they hear a bear. And one of the men takes off running barefoot to get away from the bear, and the other man starts frantically trying to get on his running shoes. And the man who's taken off running leans back and as he's running says, "What are you doing? You're never going to be able to outrun the bear." And the guy putting on his tennis shoes says, "I don't have to outrun the bear. I have to outrun you." And I think this is a good analogy also for this case because I think a lot of women are thinking, if I want to step into leadership, if I want to take that big stretch role, then I have to be perfect or outrun the bear. But the reality is your competition is other human beings who are also have pluses and have minuses and have flaws as well. And so just be clear about who the competition is and don't create such an impossibly high standard that you can't get, you know no one could overcome it.
The next question will be from Katarina, and she is asking, do you think being emotional is a drawback for female leaders?
Hi, Katarina. Thanks for your question. I think everyone's emotional, both men and women. I think probably we tend to show it a bit differently. But when I talked about how the world is moving, I do think that a more collaborative leadership style, a leadership style that recognizes the entirety of the human being is becoming the way the world is moving in terms of leadership. And I'm finding that that is a competitive advantage toward women versus what has stereotypically been the leadership of command and control. Just to give you an example, one of the key skills that I think comes more naturally to women is the ability to take a coaching leadership style. And so instead of when someone asks questions, telling them the answer, asking questions back and helping them self-explore the answer. That type of leadership, it takes a bit more time and it takes a bit more relationship and connection. But the upside, it's a bit more investment on the front side, but the upside is that the person grows in their confidence and their ability to solve their own issues and is much more committed to the solution because they co-created it. And so these are things where I think if women are more emotional, it's a competitive advantage when it comes to how we lead.
Maybe I can take the next two, and you will respond in a bundle, since we have a lot of questions. Susanna is asking, Kristen, thank you for the great presentation. Would you recommend a book to read on this topic? And Karina is asking, how do I, as an early career woman aspiring for leadership help, change the rule of engagement that may tend to favor men over women?
Great. I want to answer both, if I can. So there are a lot of great books on this topic, but the one that I think, so one of my biases is be very strong on return on investment. So people always ask me, how do you have 4 children and a big job and travel a lot? And one of the ways that I manage that is that I don't waste my time on things that I don't think will result in a sufficient return for the time they take. And so in terms of books, I feel the same way, high ROI, and so I would recommend Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. It's heavy on research, it's laid out nicely, it's not a super long read, and it's eye-opening. And I have to say, I read it, and then I said to my husband, we've got 2 daughters and 2 sons, and so I said, you know, I need you to read this for our daughters. And he read it, and he came back, and he said, actually, I needed to read that for our daughters and our sons. And I thought it was a really good insight, and so I think it's a great read, you know, regardless of your gender, and certainly if you've got someone behind you supporting you in your career, it's probably a good read for them too. With regards to the other question that Karina asked about breaking the rules of engagement, yeah, I think it's a great question. I believe that because leadership is shifting, because the world is VUCA, because everything's being turned on its end, and there is going to be a talent shortage, that it's kind of a supply and demand thing, and it's going to a certain extent, self-correct. I believe that. Now, will it correct at the speed that I would prefer? For sure not. The data would show I will no longer be on this earth when we see parity in top leadership. But I think if each of us work to plant a tree today, then we have a chance with regards to the world we leave behind for the people who come after us. And we need to plant those trees today so that they are there 20 years from now. One of the things that I like to do in terms of helping catch when unconscious bias is happening is I actually talk about it a lot, because when you do that, it provides the foundation to then bring it up later if you think that's happening. And so, for instance, if I talk to my leaders about unconscious bias when there isn't a particular situation at hand, then, and they understand the concept, and I also typically will talk about it from a perspective of really owning my own biases, because no one doesn't have these biases, and as much as I hate to say it, as a woman leader, as an HR person, you know, I succumb to bias against women leaders myself, and have learned to try to be better at recognizing that. But I think if you recognize that everyone has this challenge, it disarms it a bit, and once you've disarmed it a bit, if you have a case later where you need to point out that the rules of engagement are perhaps a bit unfair, you have a foundation upon which to have that conversation.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Maybe we can take 2 questions from the participants now. I can see when Agata raised her hand. Agata, you may now pose the question. Agata? Maybe we can try another one. Just a minute, let's see. I think Matilda, would you like to pose a question? And Reg.
I would, and I think I'm unmuted now. Do you hear me?
We hear you.
Yeah.
Great, hi. So my name is Matilda Fleming, and I work for the European Women's Lobby on women in decision making, and thank you very much for hosting this. It's always very, very interesting to talk about women's leadership. However, what concerns me a bit in the presentation is the lack of a kind of structural perspective. what we often say here is that we need to change the system. We don't need to change the women. Whereas Kristen, I saw a lot of, like, your kind of action points were all about women themselves. And obviously, I mean, I do believe that women in their career path also need to be self-aware and so forth, but surely we also need to change the system. It's about breaking the rules of engagement, indeed, that was said earlier. And I would like you to dig a bit deeper into that, because there are, I mean, many company cultures around the world that are not friendly to women, and where it is, I mean, that are simply not promoting women for the fact that they're women, and it's not even just unconscious bias, it's also conscious biases. So yeah, I'd like to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your question, Matilda. And you're right. You know, I think that the book that I suggested, Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, for detractors, they said, hey, you know, it's not all about what the women need to do, etc. So I take your point. The goal that I had here today was to meet women where they are and to make them feel empowered that there's some action that they can pragmatically take. And so I came at it from the angle of things that we can do. Quite honestly, the challenge that you describe is a systematic cultural and societal problem that's very deeply held and deeply woven and is impacted by a number of things. And it is complicated. And I do think there's lots of activity that needs to happen in that space. And quite honestly, I'm probably not the person who's best equipped to talk about how we unravel that mystery. What I can tell you is I've self-selected to work for companies who already get it and who see the competitive advantage here. But I know that's not the case all the way around the world. And I don't know if my colleagues from Empower Women would like to ring in on the question, because I think it's very real and very fair. But I don't know that I'm qualified to answer. I can't hear you, Diana.
Oh, apologies. This is a question that have so many dimensions, and in our discussions and our webinars, you know, it was reflected as well, and it also depends on political system, social constructing, family, role of engagement at the community, but also state level, so many components. There is always a debate and versus global south and global north, and there is no, truly from our side we discover there is no right or wrong or straightforward answer, and this is all depends on the different situations. And I invite you all to maybe continue the discussion and to via online and to take a little bit more deeper I don't know, a conversation about the unconscious bias and how it affects leadership and our decision and economic empowerment and the job activities and so on. Kristen, the good news is we have so many questions. The bad news is that we will be soon short of time, so maybe we can read a bundle of questions and then you can kind of address in a comment. Or Kristen, previously you mentioned strength that women bring on the table. Do you think that we should be trying to get ahead ourselves, outrun the other human playing by the rules of games, or try and change the rules of game? Often these two are opposed. Question from Helena. Simplicity asks, if only 4% of Fortune 500 leaders are women, the rules are set by men who do not understand women barriers to development. Ferdinand is asking, when, sorry, it's just a comment, but when Monica speaks, I didn't hear. Mariške, and I apologize if I don't pronounce correctly, how can we become aware of our bias and how to handle this? Haifa, what do you think about women empowering women conspiracy? Elisenda, what concrete examples can you share regarding how one shall behave in typical solution where a woman lose versus our male colleagues? Shall we just fake? What are key competencies to practice?
Now I'm overwhelmed. So, so there was one question in there that I absolutely remember, and so maybe I will start with that one. And it was, how do we become aware of our own bias and how to handle it? Because again, I've said I tend to have a very pragmatic nature. So what can we do? What can each of us do today? What's my bit that I can do instantly that will make an impact? And one of the things that I found is that I like to call it flip it to test it, that you can simply do a mental exercise to ask yourself if you perhaps have bias at play by just mentally flipping who you're dealing with for someone else. I anticipated that perhaps I would get this question, so let me see if I can find it, because there's this great Twitter account called Man Who Has It All, and he just flips things we sometimes say from the perspective of from between men and women, and they become funny. And so I printed a couple out to show you. So here's one. 3 cheers for the women who willingly give up their own free time to help their husbands arrange for childcare over the school holidays. And it's funny, but we say that all the time with the genders flipped. Or I thought this was a funny one from the Olympics. Male Olympian is not an offensive term. It's simply a way to differentiate them from normal Olympians. End of story. And so, you know, it's by flipping it to test it, I think it's a way for us to catch ourselves when something that we're saying or doing seems off. There was a lot of coverage during the Olympics about the, I would say the gendered coverage of the Olympics. And I think by flipping it to test it, it highlighted where there was unfair or imbalanced treatment and brought it to light. There were a number of other questions. I can't remember them anymore. I'm sorry.
Maybe I can repeat just one. For example, what concrete examples can you share regarding how one shall behave in typical situation where women lose versus male colleagues? Shall we just fake? What are the key competencies for practice?
Not sure I really understand the question. Is it, should we pretend that we're men or act like ourselves?
Maybe Elisanda, can you just specify? I would think that Elisanda is interested in what key qualities or competencies should we practice to be as a good leaders as men are. Or maybe another one. If only 4% of Fortune 500 leaders are women, the rules are set by men who do not understand women barriers to development. What is your take on this?
Yeah.
Simplicity. Question from Simplicity.
Okay. Simplicity, and I'll try to get back to you also, Elisanda. So Simplicity, that was well articulated. If only 4% of top leadership in Fortune 500 companies and a small percentage of top leadership in other companies is held by women, then that means the rules are made by men. And that is exactly why I'm here today, because we have to change that. And it makes it difficult for this window where it's not been changed, but this is where my call to action to women is I think a lot of us have an idea of why people seek out positions of power. Maybe we think, well, you know, it's people are seeking power or money or status or things like that. But there's a very real other reason to seek out positions of power, and that is to be able to be in the place to help influence those decisions. And so perhaps that's a stronger motivator for women. I don't know. It's a stronger motivator for me. I don't want someone who's not like me making those decisions for me. And so I would rather be in a place where my voice can be heard, and where decisions get made is in top leadership. And so my call to action here today is to strongly consider the role that you can play, whether that's leading in a corporation or leading in your community, leading in whatever circle you can influence, because we need more women to step up and lead. With regards to Elisanda's question just around what qualities or competencies are important in leadership to be comparable to men, I truly believe that leadership is gender neutral. The things that we're looking for in a top leader are the same across. And as I indicated earlier, as the world starts to change, that becomes much more of a collaborative leadership style, one that's inclusive, one that listens to people, one that brings out the best and inspires people. And I think that's the same whether you're a man or a woman.
Thank you, Kristen. We now have a question from Dana, who asks, what advice would you give to assertive women who have been giving feedback that they are bossy or aggressive? It would seem if they try to push back on this, it would also serve to validate the feedback. What advice would you give to assertive women who have been giving feedback? This is sort of feedback.
Yeah, so it was a little hard to hear you, Monica, and so I'm going to repeat the question. And it was just, if a woman's been getting feedback that she's bossy or aggressive, what can she do, especially because if she pushes back on that feedback, then she contributes to the perception that she's aggressive and bossy, so it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I think, first of all, you might be bossy and aggressive, so be sure to look and check and see if that's perhaps at play. But we do find that unconscious bias could lead us toward women getting that feedback for the same behavior that is acceptable or even welcomed in men because of those unconscious biases. And so if you have an opportunity to help subtly educate people with regards to unconscious bias, that could be a way where people could catch themselves and could better understand how that could come into play, or the different expectations. Quite honestly, if you work for a company where and you feel like you have alternatives, sometimes it may be easier to go work someplace else where they're a bit more enlightened. Although I know that's not an option for everyone, but I think it's an option that that surprisingly few people consider, which is that they can be employed someplace else, perhaps a place where they can blossom more. And so those would be the things that I would say to keep in mind. But whether it's fair or not, women have to walk a tighter tightrope. And I think, you know, like I said, it may not be fair, but it's the facts. And so I was reading an article the other day. I'm going to see if I can lay my hands on it while we're talking. And it was just about what does it take to be seen as competent? Here it is. It was in Harvard Business Review, and the title is, "To Seem Confident, Women Have to Be Seen as Warm." And the statement is that there was some research that showed that men are seen as confident if they're seen as, men are seen as confident if they're seen as competent, but women are seen as confident only if they come across as both competent and warm. So this is perpetually the higher standard, or the narrower band that women have to walk through. There was a mention in here of the fact that at a much higher rate, women get the feedback in their performance evaluations that that they need to you know, be warm or nurturing or sociable and things like that. And this is not, again, back to the flip it to test it. Ask yourself, is this feedback you would be putting in a man's performance evaluation? And so it's probably worth the read to check out that Harvard Business Review article, but the way the world is today, women have to be warm as well. Diana, we can't hear you.
Maybe one more question, Kristen. How we can see the gender balance of Switzerland when we know that is one of the most democratic countries, but women having some rights have not the same rights with men. And I assume this is not only in Switzerland, but only in the global north. So maybe if we can get a kind of more general approach to the question, I think it will be useful for our participants. And this is a question from Ferdinand. And maybe last one. Kristen, thank you for your authentic sharing. Could you share your views on how we get men and women at the very top to hear and engage in different ways of doing things when they are already not hearing or not open to women being empowered to be themselves and be leaders? Many thanks. A question from Helen.
Okay. So I think the first question was just around how to have an impact in a society that perhaps doesn't always treat both genders as equal. And again, I would come back to my pragmatic advice, which is find the biggest position from which you can lead. Figure out a way to get in a role where you can have a voice, because it really does have an impact. And as I've grown into higher and higher leadership roles, it hits you that, back to Simplicity's question, that's where the decisions are getting made. And so if you want to have an influence on the world, you have to be in a place where you can do that. And so wherever that is, pragmatically from where you are, I would suggest that you seek that out. Secondly, how do we get men and women to engage in different ways? It's a great question. Being really honest, this isn't a topic that I thought that much about before a couple of years ago. And so I think there's a lot of things that are pulling people's attention, lots of topics, lots of challenges in the world, and not everyone is going to be passionate about this particular topic. And so I get that, but it does impact half of our population, and so for me, I think ROI-wise, it's a good investment. And so I've chosen to make sure that I make myself available for webinars and things like this in order to try and have an impact there. And what I've found is by doing that, people get curious and they start asking me questions, and I start having conversations with people about this topic, and suddenly now we're having a conversation about it and they're interested. And so I would just say, you know, step up and do something and contribute and talk about what you do and the passion that you have for it. And you might be surprised at how many people will catch your passion and ask you questions and want to know more, and then you have a platform to help educate people who maybe already don't have a passion for the topic.
Thank you so much, Kristen. We do have a lot of questions. I would like to apologize for not taking all of them, but promise we will try to come up with more webinars sometimes very soon. Ilinca, Monica, I would like to give you the opportunity to reflect over this webinar and some of the discussions we had in the past 1 hour.
First of all, thank you to Empower Women, and in you particular, Diana, for helping us organize this webinar. And a special thank you, Kristen, for taking up the time and sharing your wisdom with us. It was truly inspirational, and I find it very interesting that we've had a chance to look at things from quite a few perspectives, especially the unconscious bias point of view, as well as practical tips for women that find themselves in difficult positions when it comes to leadership. I think that's been very useful. Do you have any final remarks, Kristen, that you'd like to share with us?
Thanks for the opportunity, Ilinca. I also would like to thank the colleagues from Empower Women and UN Women for hosting this webinar. I think it's a very important topic, and I appreciate the efforts to provide this platform. I would also especially like to thank Monica and Ilinca for your leadership as global champions for women's economic empowerment. You're at a very young age already having an impact and taking the opportunity to be leaders from where you are, and I think that's really great role modeling. And I appreciate your vision to bring this topic to the listeners and to make this webinar happen. I think you're an inspiration to other young women, and I'm impressed by both of you, so thank you. Just as a closing thought from me, women's voices are underrepresented from the world, and I would just ask everyone who's out there to really reflect on what you have to offer the world, because every single one of us is here for a reason, and I don't want you to hold back something from the world that it's owed. And I would leave you with a quote from Nelson Mandela, which is this: "May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you everybody who joined us. It was so interesting to get very practical tips about how to engage in it. I definitely some notes, and I will try to implement some of the things, or most of the things. for all your questions and for being so engaged. I hope for this webinar left you feeling very empowered and inspired. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you on Twitter.
Thank you so much, Ilinca, Monica, to entire community. Thank you so much, Kristen. It was a very engaging webinar, and actually to our community it was the first webinar we used video cameras, so you could see us live, our smiles, our reaction to the theory and so on. I just, while we close this webinar, just some reflection from our side. Kristen mentioned about the importance of sharing the voice and the stories, and I would like to just showcase this progress report of UN Women, where we have so many voices of women and more specific data on women leadership, gender pay gap, gap in leadership, and so many important issues that connect to the general topic of economic empowerment and leadership per se. On empowerment.org, you'll have an opportunity to join currently the historic campaign that speaks about women's role in history, and not only, at the government level but community. We would like to showcase those women who are driving change, and this change is creating the bubble effects, and this is why we are here. This is why we have so many amazing champions around the world, as Ilinca and Monica is, and this is why we collaborate with so many inspiring leaders as Kristen to bring this agenda forward and to create more opportunities for young women and men. Please join our movement, please join us in our efforts, and we are looking forward to the future webinars to engage together and to discuss further, not around only women in leadership, but maybe to develop, the topic more broadly. Thank you so much to all. See you next time.